So, at the risk of repeating ourselves a touch, just to bring up to speed on what really is getting too much attention, but nonetheless, Manchester United have released a statement noting the media fallout around Cristiano Ronaldo's interview with Piers Morgan. In less formal briefings, the club has expressed extreme disappointment with the timing and the manner of the interview. Their official statement says they're going to take some time, consider their response after the full facts have been established. And to be fair, we are only working off the clipped promotional cells to the full interview, and we're seeing the most explosive parts. So they're hanging on to see the 90-minute interview, if you can stomach 90 minutes, which has not been released yet, will be released this week. Piers Morgan, I'm sure, punching the air at the moment with the fallout. So to discuss further what the fallout will be, very happy to say we are joined on the line by Mark Critchley of The Independent. Mark, evening.
Evening, Joe. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. So just some of what Ronaldo has said. He talked about the club lacking empathy for him when his daughter fell ill around the time of the pre-season tour. On the betrayal point, which has certainly made headlines, he says it's Ten Hag who's betrayed him, but he says not only Ten Hag, another 2 or 3 guys around the club, I felt betrayed. He also said of Ten Hag, I don't have respect for him because he doesn't show respect for me. If you don't have respect for me, I'm never going to have respect for you. And then he talked about stagnation at the club as well. Nothing changed, surprisingly, he said. Not the pool, the jacuzzi, the gym, even the kitchen, the chefs, whom I appreciate, lovely people. They stopped in time, he says, at the club. It surprised me a lot. I thought I'd see lots of other things, technologies, infrastructure. Unfortunately, we see a lot of what I used to see at 21 and 22 and 23 years of age. It really surprised me. Since Ferguson left, I haven't seen an evolution at the club. Progress is zero. And he did say you have to tear it down and rebuild it. If they start with me, not a problem. And then just for the sheer hell of it, I'm not sure about him picking his battles here. He decided to do a drive-by on Ralph Rangnick. I'd never heard of this guy, not a manager. What the hell was going on there? So out of nowhere, Ralph Rangnick somewhere in Europe was saying, what? Really? So there we are. They are the promotional cells to this 90-minute interview. This is the end of Ronaldo at Manchester United.
I think it has to be. I think it's practically impossible to. Yeah, I hate to use that word because it's got such a weight to it, that word, but it's practically impossible to see how he plays for Manchester United again now, particularly for Erik ten Hag. And I think of all the little bits that you've just mentioned there, Rooney, I know the betrayal line caused all the headlines, but I think just the fact of a player going on the record to say they have absolutely no respect in the manager that they play for just kind of makes their own position untenable, really. And that's now what United, after the position that this interview's put United in. I mean, when it came out last night, it's such a explosive story and it's such a huge thing. But my reaction after I'd just taken it all in and read the quotes and seen the clips was more that how much has really changed here. And, maybe that's a bit of an oversimplification, but, it's still such a huge story. He's the highest profile player, he's the highest paid player. He's forced them into such a difficult position. And when any player comes out and says what he said on the record, it's news, let alone if it's Cristiano Ronaldo. But really what's happened is, what everybody has long suspected is now out there in the public domain, I think. There wasn't a lot in it that was particularly surprising. I think what was surprising was how far Ronaldo went in stating it. But the sentiment, if you like, the crux of how he's felt and his position at the club was something that people have suspected for a long time, I think. And the whole thing has kind of accelerated a process that was maybe underway already. He was slowly transitioning out of the team. We've seen that under Ten Hag this season. The only question was really, to all intents and purposes, he was gone, is what I'm trying to say, sooner or later, whether it was at the end of the season or later. It's just about the manner of how he goes, and he's chose to go the hard way.
I do agree with your point, and I don't think it's mutually exclusive to say this is very compelling, big news, global news, and at the same time, it just copper fastens a situation we were all very aware of anyway. Marginalised player, raging against dying of the light, is further marginalised, and Manchester United will continue on without him. So I think both are true. It does strike me he wanted it in the summer. Manchester United wanted some kind of recompense for him. Clubs did not want to pay money for Ronaldo and take on his wage bill and take on the ticking time bomb that he is, and so no bids came in for him. So I think there is an aspect here whereby Ronaldo's picked his moment. He doesn't ever have to go back into the dressing room. He leaves in January on the understanding that the club will probably cancel his contract now.
Yeah, well, that is one of the few possibilities, I think. Like you say, they have kept their counsel really over the last. They've obviously released that statement today. I think the timing of it, as you mentioned, obviously, it's the last meaningful game that they'll really play. Well, I mean, they've got a couple just before the window opens, but it was the last time that Ronaldo might have missed the ones going ahead because of the World Cup if he goes late into that competition. So the timing makes sense from that point of view. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of there's no rush for United to act really. There's no pressure of an upcoming fixture that they have to suspend him for, as was the case after Tottenham. The ball's in their court to decide what they want to do, and so yeah, there's a few options. There's the termination that you mentioned. I think, look, everything's on the table, but it would be an extremely costly, probably a legally challengeable and actionable process. So whether they can go down that route, I think it will be the most difficult one to do, and maybe one that they don't actually want to do when all the numbers and the figures, when they've taken all those into account. There's some kind of mutual agreement, which would probably be the best to suit both parties. But again, finding that might prove difficult. And then there's exactly what you mentioned, and as was the case in the summer with the buyer. And if they can find a suitable buyer, then maybe that could work out. The only real offer that came in for him during the summer was this huge one from Saudi Arabia, which I don't think he would be minded to accept. And really what we're talking about here, and what is kind of compelling about the whole thing, is that we're reaching that point where a guy who thinks he's the best player in the world has got to kind of come to terms with the fact that he's not even the best centre forward at Manchester United anymore. And how he thinks, where he thinks he can go and where he's willing to go is going to be a bit of a reckoning for him. And we'll see how it shakes out. I don't think anything's particularly changed since the summer in regard to there being an appetite from top European clubs to go there, particularly not in January, which is such a difficult market anyway. So it really is difficult for him to see a way out. I think the only thing that we're certain after all this is that he's making his way out at some point.
He sure is. We're talking here with Mark Critchley from The Independent. Marco, I'm curious if you have heard anything to put meat in the bone of the betrayal word, because Cristiano Ronaldo in this interview with Piers Morgan used the word betrayal twice, made a point of coming back to emphasise betrayal. So there is, like, as a working theory, what I'll call the Graham Souness theory. So Souness for a number of weeks on TalkSport has been putting forward the argument that when Erik ten Hag and Ronaldo would have sat down at Carrington over the summer after the difficulties around pre-season, they would have had a conversation, and presumably, says Souness, promises would have been made to Ronaldo about the extent to which he might figure in Ten Hag's plans, and that clearly these promises have been broken, because there's no way Ronaldo would have accepted the season playing out the way it has. Now, Souness, in fairness to him, will fully admit up front, I haven't heard that, I've no information, that's just my guess, that's my sense, that's how the world of football works. Have you heard anything to explain Ronaldo's sense of betrayal?
Well, I think if it relates to what you're talking about there in terms of playing time, there's never been any suggestion that Ten Hag offered him status as a guaranteed starter. I think that would have been presumed certainly when he came to the club under Solskjaer. But that isn't the way that Erik ten Hag operates. Speaking to people who know him and stuff like that, he wouldn't have come in and said, you're going to play every game for me. He's challenged Ronaldo effectively to prove that, and to excel and to prove that he deserves to start.
Yeah.
And
what do you think the betrayal is then?
I think, look, it's difficult, as you said at the start, about we're going off clips, aren't we? We're going off excerpts from an interview that are there to promote it.
Yeah.
The most interesting thing I thought was this question of, the horrific incident with the tragedy that he had in April with the death of his child, the newborn child. That to kind of level that accusation at the club that they have somehow not stood by him in the best way that they could. That to me would be, I think, if he's looking to bring people with him on this argument that he's making that the club has betrayed him, if there's something substantial there, then that would be the most compelling thing that he has for his case, and we wait to see whether there's anything more on that. But other than that, dealing with the club myself over the time when that happened and over the summer as well, when he didn't return for pre-season training, they were always adamant that he had a family issue and that Erik ten Hag always addressed it that way. And the public face of United during that time was always very supportive of Ronaldo going through that. So again, I'm struggling to understand exactly. I imagine it might be something to do with that, but I'm struggling to understand what it is. If it is that, in terms of playing time, he's played games. He has. I think the way that Ten Hag's handled this actually has been really quite deft and quite clever. He's given him enough of a chance to prove that, he's given him the opportunity to impress in the team. He's played. I think he started 10 games this season. Now, up until the last week where he's missed these 2 through illness, United have played 19. So that's just about half of the games United have played. Yeah. Think of him as a peripheral figure. He's had chances and opportunities to impress. It's on him that he hasn't done that. And so if the complaint is more about playing time, then that doesn't really stand up to reason either. He simply hasn't given Ten Hag or given the club, the wider club, the reason to believe that he's the man to take them forward and the man that should be starting all the time. So it's difficult. If I imagine if that's what the betrayal is referring to, then it doesn't really stand up, I don't think.
Well, I'm presuming Piers Morgan, who can do an interview, I mean, there's no doubt, will have the wherewithal to press him, even though I do suspect this is a very favourable hearing. We'll have the wherewithal to press him on what do you mean by betrayal, and we might find out. Or maybe it is just this suitably vague, plausible sounding word, which, is all he can kind of grasp at, when the truth is he just can't accept the reality of his situation. What would be damaging is if there is more information around the club lacking empathy. So his son passed away at birth in the April, and then the reasons, it seems, for not going on the summer tour was that his newborn daughter had fallen ill. And there is this, it is a strange world whereby, his absence in the summer tour in almost any other walk of life would not even be questioned. Whereas, Ronaldo, it's been talked about as a problem. And that probably fails to appreciate the magnitude of what he and his family have gone through. And he's probably still going through it. I mean, he does strike you as somebody, yes, he's upset that his body isn't where it needed to be, but he also strikes you as somebody who is behaving in self-defeating fashion. His tolerance for any kind of setback or frustration is zero. And I think a happier person might be able to take some of that in better fashion. So I suspect it may, he may look back in several years and realise he was still in the throes of grief, and his home situation can't be comfortable. And I'm even wary of going much beyond that, because I'm not a psychologist and I don't know the situation. But it just follows that you can't go through a life event like that and be all good several months later.
I think that's absolutely correct. And there is a degree, well, more than a degree, but there's an empathy as well with the situation that he's experienced over the past 6 months, year, in that regard. And this is, again, I think, is the difficulty here with. I've been very careful trying to, doing appearances or writing anything today or tweeting or anything, because you don't want to judge too much before we actually have the full extent and the full context of the quotes that are coming out. And even then, I mean, look, he might not open up in the way or on subjects like that. I think it's difficult to speculate. We can only really judge it from our vantage point on how one of the most high profile and one of the most famous players in world football, and certainly a kind of living legend in Manchester United's history, has acted in terms of his own relationships with the rest of the football club, with his manager, with his teammates. That's all that we really have to go on. I'm sure there are wider circumstances and things like that which will be taken into account and should be taken into account in full time. But it is difficult to do that when you're just given a handful of clips and, a write-up in the Sun with a few choice quotes and the most sensational quotes of all. So we await further context. And like I say, I think maybe that might soften some of the reaction to it. But I think some of what he said is so extreme.
Yeah.
that I almost don't see. I almost don't see there really being a way back from this. I think it's a huge kind of the PR on this. Like, you know, the first thing that people started talking about last night was his legacy. You know, as if he's already left the club. You know,
Yeah.
as if that has already been tarnished, and that's hard to come back from, I think.
Yeah, it sure is. I guess it's going to be an interesting few days when it is released, and we'll see the fallout, no doubt. Mark Critchley, Northern football correspondent for The Independent. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.